Tak přátelé, tohle je takový lehký vánoční dárek od Valve. Jde o ně klasicky bez jakéhokoliv oznámení, prostě dropnou dokument o Half-Lifeu. Zároveň teďko Half-Life je na Steamu úplně for free a udělali po 25 letech update prej. Co jsem jakoby zaregistroval, jo. Ano. Což je jakoby fakt strašně brutální záležitost, jo. Takže jdeme se na to kouknout. Let's go. Tak. To je správně.
You just go over the mountains over here and you're in high desert. You get past Ellensburg and it's high desert. So I spent a lot of time out there getting reference. Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington. I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos and also a lot of just reference imagery of just like, hey, this is what desert looks like and big cliffs and stuff like that. That drive was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and I'm not even sure I spent the night. I did. I must have spent the night down there. So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out in the Columbia Gorge.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
Může 25 let, ne, prostě. To je strašný. A z toho uší kůži taky, no. No. Já mám člověče spíš jako husí kůži z toho, že mně bylo pravděpodobně teda 8 let, kdy jsem četl nějaký, nebo ne 8, 10 let, kdy jsem četl nějaký článek o Half-Lifeu ve Skorečku. Jakože to je fakt jako neuvěřitelný. Ano, když to tak nějak prostě jakoby člověk vezme, tak ty vole, co se vlastně za těch posledních 25 let jakoby takového velkého stalo, kromě Half-Lifeu? No, stalo se hodně věcí, stalo se třeba Undertale, stalo se třeba Hollow Knight prostě, jo, stal se třeba Last of Us, ale a nevím, RDR 2 třeba a tak dále, ale ty vole, je vůbec něco jakoby porovnatelný s tímhletím? GTA 5? To určitě ne. Určitě ne. To, myslím si, že GTA 5 tak je vlastně akorát použití nějakého systému z GTA 3 a potom pokračování, který akorát jakoby de facto dotáhli do dokonalosti. Já se teď bavím jakoby o čistý revoluci v gamingu. Jo, že tohleto skutečně jako byla revoluce. Zaklínač? Zaklínač byla podle mě taky akorát evoluce. Spíš než evoluce, no. Ale strašně záleží, tyba, no.
Mike Harrington. I was co-founder at Valve. I wasn't really used to big companies. When I started at Microsoft, it wasn't that big. It was like 1,500 people, like a big high school. 9 years later, it was significantly bigger. I'm thinking, oh, this place is too big, and that was still like 1996, so they had a long ways to go. I told my managers like a year before, like, I'm leaving in a year, and I'm going to start a game company. And the first person I talked to was
Mike,
a good friend of mine, Michael Abrash. But at that time, he was trying to do something within Microsoft, and by the time it made sense, John Carmack had convinced him to go work at id.
Kámo, strašně mě mrzí jedna věc, a tohle bude moje dvouhodinová reakce, ty vole. Mě strašně prostě mrzí to, že Quake tak strašně umřel. Já bych si přál normálního Quakea s normální singleplayerovou kampaně multiákem.
So how could you say no to that?
Ale prostě asi to už není možný dneska, jo.
I said, Gabe, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave and I'm going to start a game company. He goes, I want to leave. I want to start a game company. I go, all right. And that was it.
On the surface, we should have failed. And realistically, both Mike and I thought we would get about a year into it, realize we'd made horrible mistakes, and go back to our friends at Microsoft and ask for our jobs back. But we did think that we knew a fair bit about software development, that there were expertise that goes into it. I think we also had some pretty clear ideas of how to design a company, right? So when we were building Half-Life, we were also designing Valve at the same time.
Mm-hmm. We had no plan except for, by then, like I mentioned, Michael had gone to id. And he said, oh, you're starting a game company, you have to use our engine. So Gabe and I flew down to Mesquite to meet id. We spent a good deal of time with, John Romero, and he told us,
John Romero prostě.
This is what you need to do to start a game company. You need to go out.
Prostě kámo, John Romero, týpek, který prostě měl na marketingu svojí hry to, že z hráčů udělá svoje děvky. Tady ten marketing mi normálně dneska chybí. Kdyby dneska přišel ty vole třeba, nevím, Mike Ibarra z Blizzardu a řekl, že z nás udělá svoje děvky, tak ho mají zavřou. Jo, jako to mě normálně fakt chybí, kámo.
Hire some level designers and do that kind of thing. We kind of understood the engineering part. And then, because we were Michael's friends, we walked away with the source code to Quake that day. We had no contract yet. We had kind of an idea of what it could be, and they just gave us a CD, and we had kind of the crown jewels of id, and that, game on.
I think most of us had no game development experience. We were either amateurs working in our homes at night for fun, or some people were from the software world, but they had never worked on a game. I think we had 3 or 4 people in the entire company who had actually shipped a game when we started Half-Life. We have to figure out what is Valve's first game. So we have to come up with an IP. So everything is done from scratch.
Gabe came into the office and he said, I read this story. I read this Stephen King.
Počkat, vážně byla Half-Life první Valve hra? To byla jejich prvotina? Tomu nevěřím.
Story called
to je úplná blbost, kámo.
Stephen King. It's got monsters, people in a grocery store, fog comes in, monsters in the fog, use your imagination. We didn't want to write that as a game. That wasn't really the point, but it was just the tension and, how it felt.
Well, it was interesting. At first, we had 2 games. Greg was working Prospero, and then Half-Life was originally called Quiver.
My job was then build a team and figure out another game for us to build. That'll be the second game Valve ships. What features should it have? How is it going to be different from a normal first-person shooter?
Every time the engine got a feature for Prospero, Half-Life stole it. And then Half-Life just started getting visually, more impressive and cooler. And eventually it just, because it was going to ship sooner, it just stole the resources from Prospero, and Prospero just faded away.
This character had a floating orb, and it wanted to have some effects on it. It's kind of magical energy, something. And so I worked with them on that and came up with the first version of the beam effects. And they were using it. They were happy with it. And then people on Half-Life are coming over and like, what is that? How did you do that? So very quickly that got into Half-Life, the disaster sequence.
Já mu tak strašně ikonický level tohleto normálně, ty vole, to je...
Has kind of beam effects all over it, and we ended up using it for the Vortigons.
Like there are a bunch of things that we were doing that we thought would help us tackle the problem of what video games were. And what video games were a rapidly changing field where at the time 90% of video games failed to turn a profit. And a few percentage of them were very, very profitable, right? So
tohle je strašně dobrý point, protože v té době tak prakticky nikdo nekupoval videohry. Jako já třeba můžu garantovat to, že někdy v okolo roku 95 tak opravdu jediný lidi, kteří kupovali v Čechách, kteří si kupovali hry, tak byli lidi, kteří si importovali ze zahraničí, anebo třeba ty vole vydělávali neskutečný peníze a bylo jim to úplně uprdele. Je jakože skutečně to probíhalo prostě tak, že ty si skoupil tenkrát nějakou 386, nebo nějaký třeba ty vole Early Pentium s voodoo grafikou za 40 000, což tenkrát bylo jako dneska 100 000. A už jakoby nikoho nenapadlo ty vole kupovat jakoby si hry, že jo? Protože to bylo strašlivý, no.
It was a field that really valued talent.
Like I said, Gabe and I brought some people, and then, from there on out, we had to hire people. And, Romero said you got to hire level designers. So, we found some...
Mám tady někoho v chatu, kdo je takhle starý a řekne mi, kolik tenkrát stály hry? Originálky. Kolik stála třeba krabicovka Quakea 2? Jinak jako pro představu, prostě, abych třeba tušil, ty vole. Je to někdo takovej, kdo by to jako zhruba tušil? Necelý 3000. Jo, 2000, anebo i třeba 2500. Jo, takže třeba kolem 2 litrů a plus inflace. No, kolik to může být dneska, ty vole? Kalkulačka, inflace. Já se chci tam totiž podívat na to, jak reálně byly hry drahý, jo. Chci spočítat minulou inflaci, jo. V roce 95 teda zkusíme a mám 2000, jo. A kolik by to bylo teďko? Kolik by to bylo v roce 2023? Počkej, co je špatně, ty vole. V roce 95 mám takže 2022. Oni asi chtějí, očekávám, že jo. Ježíš, kámo, co to je za kalkulačku, ty vole. 5108. To je brutální. Takže opravdu Quake 2 stála krabicovka přes 5000. V době, kdy vejplaty byly třeba 8-10 tisíc, ty krávo. No, takže dneska hry nejsou drahý. Dneska hry fakt drahý nejsou. V porovnání s tím, jaká je dneska kupní síla, tak dneska hry drahý nejsou. Tam prostě problém je v tom, že drahý je všechno okolo, že jo. No.
People who had industry experience.
Worked on Rise of the Triad first as a pixel artist, and then went with Duke Nukem, and then everything just went nuts.
Duke, ty vole.
But I was sitting in my office one day, and my phone rang, just out of the blue, and I pick it up, and it's this recruiter. Eventually, he hooked me up with Gabe, and they flew me up here. It was a big surprise.
But then we started looking, you know, the nice thing that we had is we had a whole bunch of people in the world who had been working on mods, and so we could start looking at those folks. And that's where we hired a lot of our designers.
Steve and Guthrie, Steve Bond, John Guthrie were my favorite hires by far. Other than Doug, Gabe sent them an email and they're like, who is this scammer? You know, never heard of these guys. Just kidding.
Hoši, co vy si pamatujete, ale ty hry stály kolem 2 litrů a brali jsme 10 až 15 tisíc. No jasně, akorát, že tam je taky rozdíl v tom, že ty si platil za nájem třeba 6 tisíc, jo. Chápeš, jakože i s energiema. I člověče skoro jakoby v Praze, jo. Jako dneska to samozřejmě vychází prostě trochu jinak, no takže proto právě já říkám, že teďko jsou hry opravdu jako velmi levný. I s tím, jak se zdražily, jsou pořád velmi levný.
Kids, like barely 20, I swear. And they show up and they're just the most creative, brilliant, clever. Fucking clever. Steve had the magic ability to make stuff fun.
The fact that those guys have been hired to go work on some game for some company, I think that was the start for a lot of people that something cool was going to happen because those guys were already doing stuff that was cool.
And then Mark showed up, and like Mark actually knows how stories work, you know, beginning, middle, end, and all this stuff, and he had all sorts of great ideas, and he also would just, you know, bring good ideas out of everybody else as well.
Like the person who wrote more code on Half-Life was a chemistry major who decided to be an IP lawyer in Atlanta, right? And he ended up writing more code than anybody else. The creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House. It's not like there are a bunch of people that you could say, oh, this person, you know, has a PhD in video game design. It was that combination of both finding those people when it wasn't necessarily easy to find them at that stage in the video game industry, and then also convincing them that it was a better place to work than anybody else.
To je síla, no. Jako ta člověče opět nerad to říkám, nemyslím si, že by existovala nějaká hra, která má podobně kvalitní design mobek jako Half-Life. Teď se to snažím hodně, dobře, Last of Us. V Last of Us třeba klikrové jsou úplně ikonický, bych jako řekl, ale to je třeba jako jedna mobka, jo, že v Half-Lifeu těch podobných mobek je prostě 20, jo. Až to je úplně jako šílený, jo. Každá jiná. Třeba Doom? Beru, Doom, no.
One of the things that I definitely learned was how to hire engineers. And you know, we needed some engineers.
For us anyway, we had licensed ID's engine, you know, we're using the Quake engine. And one of the things me and some of the other engineers, probably Ken, were talking about was if it would be possible to use the save system to kind of like join our levels together in a really seamless way. So you get to the end of a level, save stuff, and then load some of it on the next level and have it just feel like, you know, the world's all connected.
And so we had like every once in a while a hallway or the train would get to a point and you would have a little stop for the level to transition. And so he wrote that code leveraged on top of just the save load code to do the transitions. And I think in Half-Life 1 we got most of the transitions were, you know, a second or two.
You know, I remember when we went from 8-bit to 16-bit. Like, hey, we don't have to have all our textures fit in a certain, 256 colors. That was a huge liberation.
The two tech investments we made for half.
Ale to je vlastně pravda, čete, že jo? Protože v této době ještě všechny hry měly safe loady, že jo? Všechny. Jakože de facto Half-Life byla jakoby hra, kdy ty jsi měl jakoby malej buffer, že jo? A ty jsi de facto šel. Tam nebyly jako žádný prostě 10vteřinový jako load screeny takový, jo? Já pokud jsem měl jakoby špatný komp, že?
Life was to get to 16-bit color and skeletal animation for all the monsters.
But at the time, it was completely revolutionary. Your Quake characters it's like a text file of vertex positions over time.
I wanted so much more animation, and I wanted the animators to have the freedom to put in 100, 200, 500 frame of animation, if not more. And then you can do all sorts of other things because you have a skeleton, so it's like, oh, I can hook on a gun to a character. I can start to make changes of characters and replay the same animation or reuse most of the same model, so we can swap out heads, we can swap out this, we can swap out whatever.
Like all the technology that went into the game to make it as fun as it is was not available one generation before. So licensing the Quake engine, which was, very mature and had level designers who'd grown up just goofing around with it.
I wasn't heavily into scripting since back into Doom. Like my old Doom levels have a lot of weird, odd events in them. I think I asked Ken, is it possible that I could, have access to the character's animation, like a trigger? Like what I mentioned, I could make the guys go into an animation, I could make them run, and then I would configure everything. It was all hack. This is total hacky stuff. And that is mostly what I built, was like things like characters reacting and jumping out are made to look like, or I'd use a push brush to throw a head crab out to make it look like it launched at something.
Or if a loud sound happened,
they would respond,
would cower.
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen.
Tam jakoby mega ještě zásadní jedna věc je to, já jsem o tom viděl taky nějaký dokument před několika lety, že v původním Half-Lifeu ty jsi byl schopný jakoby de facto transportovat ty charaktery třeba o level dál, že jo? Ale už ne dál, protože to byl tenkrát vlastně jako limit toho engineu a i tak to bylo brutálně revoluční, že jo? Protože nebylo vlastně jakoby nic jiného, co by v této době existovalo s tím. Tak jakoby na prostý štěstí, že jo?
The player stands still, the universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play back something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just an interesting sign
or a sound or some vignette or something. So I came up with this interaction method where you could do little AIs where the characters would talk and interact with you a little bit. And then we wanted to do spectacle. And that was scripted sequences where you could tell a character, you need to run here and then jump into this animation, and then have a bunch of you all synchronize your animation because it's somebody flying through the air, they're smashing something, or they're doing something like that.
Yeah, and then test it and figure out, like, oh, this is real easy to break. That was the roughest thing about scripted sequences, where you'd have like a head crab jumping on a scientist or something, and it's like, yeah, it works totally fine 90% of the time, but some people just sprint right at the scientist, and sometimes we have to put them behind glass. And
sometimes getting the level designers making the player want to do the thing.
Jako taky hlavně samozřejmě na to hráči nebyli zvyklí, že jo? Jako kdybychom porovnali, jak vypadaly střílečky v 90. letech, tak ty si zapnul střílečku, zabil si pár mobek a žil si na konci levelu a pak si to dělal znova, že jo? A teďko Half-Life tak na začátku ti dal 15minutovou příběhovou expozici a teďko najednou ty vole prostě, že jo? Jakoby i tohle to vlastně rozbilo kompletně ten žánr.
That gives them the most fun is a very subtle art.
The tentacle sequence is probably the one I remember the most.
You're playing it, right? That was the first time I think they melded together.
Because you had your trigger
so closely,
and we wanted it to be triggered. So by the time you start to see it, you see the scientist flying through the air and hitting the wall. Then you could look in and you could see the scientist being carried away. The tentacle itself is separate; it's on its own, and you bring the two together, mesh them together, and boom.
It felt so seamless though, and that for me was like moments like that, and that might have been the first one, is when you start to see the scripted events and play start to blend a little bit more than just ambience.
For God's sake, open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our only way out! Oh my God, we're doomed!
Kámo, ten zvuk, ty vole.
I remember Brett in particular had done some of the lab scenes where scientists would walk from one area to another and just...
Black Mesa, já jsem Black Mesa streamoval před rokem.
Look at a monitor.
To byl zážitek, ty vole.
And it gave them a little bit of life. A ton of the work that went into that area was because we knew it was going to be the beginning of the game, and we really needed to make it a vibrant and interesting, fun place to be and explore.
So originally they were designed to sort of be behind glass. They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm going to put that right in front of you. And I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this work? It's not supposed to do it.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
The run speed for the player was so insane.
Yeah.
It was like, what, 25 miles an hour or something?
It was sprinting. It was...
You could get so far, so fast. And so you'd either have to make the scripted sequence like so quick that you could barely see what's happening. Most people weren't looking in the right place anyway, so you'd have to like get their attention with like a particle or a sound or lighting or something, and then you wanted them to see what was happening. But when we play tested, and if like a scientist was like being pulled into a vent or something, like people wouldn't just stop and like, oh, sometimes they would be like, oh wow, look at that. They just run straight ahead and just start shooting.
It's hard when you think back to it to recognize that those kind of interactive moments were so new. Like people just hadn't seen them.
It was worth it because no other games were doing that. No other games had that interactivity. No other games had that spectacle playing out in front of you. And it just added that whole feel of Half-Life. Gabe had started to develop this theory around.
Je to zajímavý prostě v tom, že ty si musel ty hráče donutit tak, aby se ti podívali a de facto chovali tak, jak ty chceš, no. Což samozřejmě jakoby úplně šílený, no. Já jsem dal Half-Life 1 jako malý pořád dokola, protože jsem měl německou verzi a nevěděl jsem, jak se řekne uložit. Jo, tak to je potom hustý samozřejmě, no. V takovýhle moment. Ale jako ty vole, no, je to prostě zajímavý. Je to prostě zajímavý fakt v tom, že jak jsem říkal, za těch 25 let nenapadá mě žádná hra, která by byla takovouhle revolucí v gamingu. Což je úplně šílený. Jako no.
Interactivity and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist. The world is acknowledging all of your actions. And that's this huge part of reinforcement.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, like, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun.
Yes.
And so we had to come up with some notion of...
Tohle toho by se měli každý vývojář nalepit na čelo, ty píčo. Lidi hrajou hry, protože to je zábava. A ne kvůli tomu, aby to byla reálie. Nikoho nezajímá reálie. Jsou extrémní případy, zmíním opět Last of Us, kde ta hra se jako tváří, jako takový realistický vyprávění prostě něčeho, nebo třeba věřím tomu, že třeba nějaký, jak se jmenovala vás ta série, která byla před Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, věřím tomu, že třeba Medal of Honor byl takový hodně jakoby blízký realismu v té době, a potom třeba některý cocka, tak byly takový hodně jako arkádový a pak tady byla Arma, operace Flashpoint a tak dále, tak to chápu, ale ta reálie tak je součástí gameplaye. Tady to prostě je píčovina, protože Gordon je nadčlověk, že jo? Samozřejmě.
Of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition and it was the degrees to which...
Někdy pravda mě baví realismus, tak já to řeknu jinak. Špatně je to, když ti reálie a třeba grafika zasahují do zábavy hry. Neměl by si nikdy upřednostnit reálii před zábavou.
The game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? In behavioral science you would say we were explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it is to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices. Yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Máme dobrý point, no. To, co dělá, taky prostě poznat. Monster problems.
Ted and I, we were on the same page in terms of what the game should look like, which would be just sort of alien in a very naturalistic kind of way. Like these are creatures from another dimension, another planet that look like they evolved in a way. And Chuck had he came from Duke Nukem. He made a bunch of monsters that went in a sort of a different direction. And for a while, the game had a hard time coalescing around a single vision.
All the ones that looked like genitals were Ted's. And all the ones with shiny bits that looked like alien soldiers were Chuck's.
That was a thing when I first came in, Ted's style and mine.
And trying to figure that out.
Trying to find the harmony between the two to make it work.
Yeah.
Ted he really liked the Wayne Barlow aesthetic, and I had a little bit different, but it worked. Ted made these really weird. He did the head crab, you know, that's pretty much the symbol of it all. And
Já teďka mám pocit, že head crab je jakoby kopírka z Aliena. Z nějakého způsobu, s tím, že pokud vím, tak Aliena původně vymyslel pan Geiger. Budiš mu země lehká, že jo? Takže ono to tak nějak všechno jakoby vychází ze sebe prostě, že jo? Ale jakoby ten design je pořád úplně šílený, ty vole, jo?
I remember taking his head crab and putting it on a scientist and making the zombie. Right. Well, we pretty much we talked, and it's like, okay, you do that. And Ted did the soldiers, I did the scientists. I did a lot of the aliens, and with the Hornet gun, I did the Hornet gun for that one as well too. You know, the alien slave.
Yeah.
Well, I did some animations for the bull squid or bull chicken. I have to call him that. But that's a Ted creature there. The Hound Eye was Ted's as well.
If it's got a lot of flesh on it, maybe too much.
Yeah, that's a Tedism.
You can always tell Ted's designs because they're much more aquarium than aquarium and/or like unspeakables.
Toto je prostě, kámo, doslova akorát jedna veliká koule prostě. To jsou doslova akorát, tam už chybí fakt jenom to péro a je to komplet. Prostě to jsou jenom koule, tyhle s nohama. Tohle je fakt mopka, jo. Big Mama, ty vole. No.
Oh, Big Mama, I forgot about Big Mama. Oh, God.
It's like, it's a testicle, right? It's like,
so disturbed.
I concepted a guy in sort of a NASA spacesuit, a scientist guy. He was actually modeled after a couple of programmers I know. Big, beefy, bearded Linux programmers, you know. And so that's where the HEV suit sort of emerged out of. There was a lot of desire for not having a space marine or a soldier be the guy. And then Chuck Jones went off and did a pretty different version of him that became known as Ivan the Space Biker.
Oh, God. I remember telling myself, it's like anytime you make a screenshot, make sure it's good, because you don't know where this is going to appear again.
We didn't know that.
And Ivan is the prime example of that one. So, you're looking at, well, go look at Quake. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that, and he's got this incredibly boxy head. And you're always hearing, don't put too many polys in it. And it's like, okay, so Ivan got the square head. And it was kind of an early, just a rough prototype of a Gordon Freeman baby. And I remember, we didn't know what Gordon looked like. So it's like I was looking for somebody, and I found Mike Harrington. It's like, Mike, what does Gordon look like? I don't know. Put yourself in there. It's like, oh, okay. And so I went in and put kind of my likeness on the early Gordon model in the game, and it kind of stayed there.
Did you have a ponytail?
Well, I was an ex-tattoo artist, so yeah, I definitely had. I don't have anything to work with now, but yeah, that point I had a ponytail on.
If you play the game, you know that it's Chuck. If you play multiplayer and you see the model, it's.
But yeah, if you look on the back of that, there's this little four triangles, and he's got a little ponytail back there. I did the G-Man, and again, that one was. Gabe
was
design, talking about the cigarette man from X-Files. So we needed our own equivalent of that.
Because after a while, after playing with the game for a long time, people...
Jako to musím si přiznat, že já jsem poprvé hrál Half-Life 2 loni na streamu. A když jsem viděl toho G-mana z 2, tak jsem říkal, ty píčo, kámo. Jako to je doma tak nadčasový design, že to fakt nechápu, jak to mohlo vzniknout v roce 2004 prostě. Jo.
Realized like, hey, we made this character
na míle daleko, jako.
Just in this one office scene in the beginning, you know, where he's behind the window and he's talking to a scientist or something, and he's like, he looks really creepy. It was late in the day that we thought, oh, okay, well, he's going to be the big bad behind all of this. Like, scatter him around in places that you can't get to him, but he's there mysteriously.
There wasn't enough in the beginning of the game. It's like we need another monster.
Design, ne, tak já člověče myslím z 2, že jo, prostě. Jako, ty krávo. Já jen potřebuju, kámo, najít, ty vole, tu normální scénu. Počkej. Tohle je ono?
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until, well, let's just say your hour has come again.
Jako ať si říká každý, kdo se co chce, tohle je šílenství normálně. To je 2004? Ano, tohle je 2004. Jo, jako o to je to šílenější. Kdyby Half-Life 2 vyšla v roce 2012, tak by si toho podle mě lidi ani nevšimli. Jakože to tak strašně designově byla ta hra napřed, až to je nepochopitelný za mě. Fakt to nechápu, protože ta hra je stará skoro 20 let, no.
Headcrabs weren't enough. It got kind of repetitious.
25, že jo?
I think I grabbed Ted and said, I need them to do this and this. And so he whipped it out in not much time at all. I'm gonna get the timing just right. And I have no time to do this, so I'm just gonna bang it out. And then once it was working, everybody said, oh, just go back and sprinkle them back in the maps. And that was this.
Then we introduced them a little earlier than we were planning.
Because they ended up being, they weren't real tough. They weren't supposed to be tough.
But they were ranged.
But they were ranged, and they were fun, and they had a big show, and like it was showing off a bunch of stuff.
To vypadlo teďka z hlavy. Vypadlo jméno těch mobek.
The assassin came in pretty late.
That was it. It was like, okay, I have a week and a half. It was already done, it was already all modeled, already all animated, and the requirement was it couldn't have any new animations and any new anything. So had to come up, I grabbed a bunch of Steve Bond's AI and banged that thing out. I built a level super crude, but it had all the right spacing and all the right heights and all the right, geometry.
Again, it's just a presentation where this creature gets to shine, this enemy gets to shine, and is your entire focus for that scene. And it's kind of a memorable experience because it just takes place in a different fashion than other encounters, and you get knocked out, and there's all kinds of, like, the lights go out, and you get dragged through a corridor and things. So again, it's something you remember in the game.
Kámo, já z toho mám normálně PTSD. Já nechápu, jak mohlo někoho napadnout, udělat takovýhle mobky, kámo. Nechápu. Jako tohle to je o tak moc dopředu, ty vole, než cokoliv, co kdy ve hrách vzniklo, to je úplná sračka, ty vole, normálně.
We just did a lot of playtesting and did a lot of level building and used all of the monsters and you used everything that we had developed and started seeing which ones kind of stuck out a little oddly. Like we had the hound eyes that Ted had concepted, and Kelly had done great sounds for them, and so they seemed like a very oddly plausible sort of alien creature. And Chuck did what we called the panther eye, which was this big black panther-looking creature that also just had a big red eye for his face. and a big shark fin coming out the back. And design-wise, he seemed like this is a very useful creature. You know, it's like when you design things, you know, you like to have a gradient of difficulty, a gradient of escalation and threat. And so if we had these hound eyes, then oh yes, this like panther, bigger, scarier looking thing would be more of a threat. It was in the game for a long time, and then sort of just worked its way out because folks couldn't find a way to incorporate a creature like that into the environment and make it seem reasonable.
The Stuka bat was, it was something that I had did, just another creature from the air. We had the chub toad that we were going to use as a feeding animal to help, and they had a mechanic to where they were going to use this to distract monsters so you could possibly get by. And it pretty much reached fruition to where we created the object, but then again, time became the factor and it had to get cut.
I grew up just outside DC, and so there's all these like big, really banal office buildings, and that's kind of the direction I went. So it started becoming a facility. And so I started making these kind of linoleum tiles and the drop ceiling, the concrete block wall, the black and white tile floor.
She was like the texture artist for for most of the game. It's just an overwhelming amount of work.
Originally, I was hand painting all of the textures, and you can really see a shift in some of them where they go from hand painted to photo reference. The photo references are much, much better. So I was all over Seattle, Harbor Island, Gasworks Park, getting rusty metal things. What can I get good pictures of that is vaguely industrial and interesting to look at, and then how can we use this? And so, sides of boxcars, and I don't know how many hallways in Half-Life are, the side of a train car kind of thing. The Kirkland Costco, a lot of time in the Kirkland Costco, getting just packages of, I don't know why I needed snacks or something.
Tak toho bývá, no.
The first year was all about opportunity, and it wasn't quite as focused. We were finding our footing.
We were getting into the 3 months before supposedly shipping in '97, and it's like, this isn't gelling. This is really not good. This is like, quick.
To byla, kámo, vlastně taková opravdu zlatá éra gamingu, ne? Blizzardi byli přesně před spuštěním Battle.netu, že jo? 96 vyšel StarCraft, 98 vyšel Brood War. Říkám to správně, ne? 1.6. Warcraft 3 ještě neexistovaly, ty byly až později, ale byly Warcraft 2 na Battle.netu. Quake 2 a Diablo 1. Jo, a Diablo 1. Yes. No, takže, ty krávo. A ještě EverQuest byl živej, že jo?
Knock off, cash grab, stupid. And let's not do that. There was a lot of disconnect between what all of the different groups were doing, what engineering was doing and what level design was doing and what animation was doing. We had a bunch of monsters that had no plans to get in the game because nobody else was assigned to work on them, and we had a bunch of levels that like, what's supposed to go in here? Oh, I don't know, everybody's gonna do a bunch of stuff, and like, no, that doesn't work that way.
So here we were, all these people doing all these cool things, and just everything's just this random collection of, oh, here's a cool moment and a cool this, and and then it's gone, and oh, now on to the next thing. Because the way we were building the game was, every level designer was kind of his own silo, his own universe.
Jo, máš pravdu, Bedy, ty vole, byla venku Final Fantasy 7, že jo? To je 97. rok. Takže on byl PlayStation 1 a byl vlastně v úplném píku a vedle PlayStation 1 tak ještě existovala Dreamcast. Mám pocit, že dokonce ještě ty vole ještě jedna konzole. No, ty bláho. To jako fakt je to zajímavý vidět ten strašný rozdíl v té generaci, no. 64, jo, N64 a tam byl Mario, že jo? Mario 64.
I think that just grew out of our, kind of mod developer roots, but it wasn't cohesive, and it certainly didn't have a you know, a strategy for like maximizing any of that stuff.
You must have been in the meeting when we reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room, right? And Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor, and we played for 2 days. He played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment he turned around. He was like this with his hair. He's going, "We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail." And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't good."
You know, we were doing our best trying to make this game and the story, and you know, we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them like, we're not going to ship this, and we.
Mám tady někoho, kdo si pamatuje, kdy se říkalo stará, dobrá, zlatá Sierra. Kámo, Sierra vydávala ty nejlepší hry. Já se nemůžu vybavit jediný propadák od Sierra, kámo, ale prostě, jakmile to byla Sierra, anebo to byly Black Isle Studios, tak to byly vždycky totální bangry, kámo, ty vole. Jo, to bylo neuvěřitelný. Ach jo, ty vole. Stará dobrá Sierra, ty vole.
Realize that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right? We could try to force this thing out the door, but that's not the...
Já mu hrozně chtěl, aby to se zapsali vývojáře taky někam za uši, ty vole. Prostě Call of Duty od teďka je prostě odpad. Prostě po tom, co dojebali ty MV3, tak už od teďka nebude cotko zajímat nikoho. Prostě protože to bylo to jediný cotko, který si dojebat neměl. No a teďko co s tím? Nic s tím neuděláš prostě, že?
The company we want to be, that's not the people we want to be, that's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
And so Kelly and I kind of sat down and sort of tried to take an inventory of all the cool stuff we had built and why weren't we just, you know, building more on top of that, and you know, those discussions kind of led to us building this kind of design cabal process to try to give some cohesion to the game and kind of changing the way we were approaching it.
And so a cabal was a small group of people, a multidisciplinary group. You know, there's like an artists, you know, level designers, engineers, and you know, everything in that. And a small team that would write up a spec for a level. You know, there was the arc that Mark had written, so we knew how that fit into the story.
And we got a small group of people together, and we started with the beginning, and we went through literally what map do we need to build to tell us the story we're going to have to tell, and then what does that connect to, and what's the next piece and the next piece.
The strongest and most influential thing that came out of them was, to me, the sketches. And they were really the visual meeting notes, right?
We came up with a formula for how that worked. We had a certain percentage of the time where you were fighting, a certain percentage of the time where you're exploring, a certain percentage of the time where you're solving puzzles. And so we could apply that uniformly through the game, and that worked pretty well.
Yep. Testing.
Everything seems to be in order.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
The whole opening of the game was specifically a reaction to how all the other first-person shooters were, whether they had cutscenes or not. Like sometimes, like they would just open without a cutscene, but you know, you're standing in a room with a gun, and there's a thing attacking you. So we could look at examples of all that, and I think there was expectation that that's what Half-Life had to do because every other game was doing it.
I can tell you the number of people who started up the game, were staring at it, and then accidentally bumped their mouse and realized this is live.
Yes. Yeah. Kámo, to je úplně přesně ono. Ty jsi na to koukal a říkal jsi, jo, to je cutscéna. To je cutscéna. A pak si, kámo, omylem praštil do té kuličkový myši a teďko najednou. Počkej, co? Já se můžu hejbat? Ty píčo. Hele, tohle vám čete nedokážu popsat. Tohle vám fakt nedokážu popsat, jaký byl tohleto zážitek prostě, jo. To je, když si vlezete poprvé do VR a teďko najednou, aha, ty krávo. Že to je takový úplně ty vole prostě, jo, jakože fakt ty vole.
Simple as that sounds, it was mind-blowing for so many people because it was too much going on. This isn't real time, this is a recording, you know.
That was sort of the way we, you know, stumbled through a lot of the new narrative tricks. It was like, well, what can we do that you could do this in a movie or a story, but nobody's doing this.
Ještě k tomu clouzavému pohybu ze starého Sourceu. No tohle je ale ještě na ID engineu. Source byl až později.
First-person shooters.
You're this anonymous scientist and you're writing on this train into work and rolled the credits at the beginning. It was kind of like a cinematic experience almost. Like I don't think games had really gone down that road. It's so funny to look at it now because it's so primitive, but at the time it felt like you were really in this Black Mesa world.
Yes.
Pre-disaster survived from the first year, so a lot of that geometry was from that first version of the game, but in a very minimal way, right? Just the basic style of some of the hallways, the curved corners in the hallways, things like that. They more became sort of like late.
Tak ještě teďko jednou. Half-Life 1 je Gold Source engine a je to upravený ID engine. Jo, tak to jsem ani nevěděl, takovouhle informace, to jo. OK. Takže tomuhle se říká Gold Source a potom později vycházel jakoby Source reedice Half-Lifeu a ta byla hrozná, že jo? A pak je Black Mesa a tím to zatím skončilo.
Lego pieces that John could use and stitch together and extrude. And I know Brett did a lot of the raw geometry from pre-disaster, and then John did most of the work to ship it, and then the post and the train ride was all John, I think.
The Sector C, so those are heavily influenced by NASA control rooms with my favorite green hammerite. Really influenced a lot of like we started with the kind of the consoles. I'm trying to remember, and then there was just lots of hallways and people were getting lost, and I did the color stripes to help people follow them places.
One of the things that was actually super exciting was how quotidian a lot of it really was. You know, the lunchroom.
Yes, tam
you press the button and it would go splat.
My God, what are you doing?
Yeah, all this work so you can start a microwave and blow up some soup, which was a reference to real life. Because that happened regularly. Like, we regularly accidentally blew up.
Laidlaw mostly, wasn't it?
Ježiš, kámo, já vidím ty CRT monitory, ty vole, to je...
There were a few people who were just, you know, challenged with kitchen appliances. And, you know, at one point we had a company fire. we had a lot of things going on in that kitchen.
All of that stuff had a real kind of eloquence that in the late 90s, in a world where everything was so over the top, you know, but we still got to go on flights of fancy.
I think like a super pivotal moment for me was when we came in this one morning and we saw the test chamber sequence that Kelly and John Guthrie and Wedge was in that office, and Dario Driller, they were all in this corner dark office where so much cool stuff happened. But so Kelly and John stayed up all night and did the test chamber sequence, and it's pretty much like the one we shipped.
I mean, that was a lot of what went on in that room that we called the submarine. It was just improvisation. You know, what can we do to solve this problem? How do we connect what's happening before to what's happening after? This needs to be somehow important, but we just don't know what to do. John and I talked about it. I went home that night and I sort of sketched out, like, you know, maybe we could do something cinematic. We'll take the camera away, we'll turn the lights off, we'll do sounds, we'll just throw everything we can at it. You know, we built that basically that day. You know, it was just a sort of a one-day throw it together. That's how fast we were moving.
They had audio, right? We had
the
script.
Tam jediný problém, který byl v této scéně, tak je to, že lidi, co měli horší kompy, tak viděli akorát z toho framey, ty vole, že jo, tam začalo to bouchat, všude totální bordel, pak najednou tma, pak najednou vortignauti, že jo, a pak zase kat na zpátek, ty vole, že jo. To bylo
like the heartbeat and the breathing, all that stuff was in there, and I played through it, and it was like, damn, I have not seen this in any medium, in anything before, experienced something like this, where this immersive experience of this actually happening like this. And at that point, it's like, okay, I see what it is we're doing. And it's this kind of immersive, unbroken experience that happens to you, the player. And then that was this key principle about how, you know, we never take you out of that role.
Personally, the difference between before the disaster sequence and after the disaster sequence, I felt we really had, I had an understanding that this product was going to be special, or it was going to be possible, it was going to be tied together, whereas before that, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of little things all disconnected. But you guys managed to tie two very different parts of the game together really well. And I thought, oh, okay, now I feel like we're on a track for finishing this product. To me, it shifted my brain to have a lot of confidence that this product's coming together rather than just generating a lot of content that exists independently of other content.
One of the ways we were funding our development was we sold a preview copy of Half-Life to a video card company, I forget which one.
Yeah.
And so they had in their contract that we had to deliver it to them by a certain date. And we got like the first 3 levels done for them. It was really a good milestone for us, just, you know, from working as a company, because hey, there was a deliverable. We got it done. And you know, we shipped it off to them. And then I swear the next day it leaked. And I was just livid at first, which was stupid. But I was just like, oh, I can't believe you guys let this get out. Like, you know, this wasn't us, you know. And then it turned into something amazing where people started playing it. And it was all over and we started, you know.
Počkat, ono to vážně líklo? Pamatuje si to někdo? Já si pamatuju velice dobře ten leak Half-Life 2, že jo? Kde doslova tam nějaký týpek ukradl tu beta verzi, že jo? A pak doslova ty vole Gaben ho přesvědčil, ať doletí za ním a pak ho zavřeli, že jo? To je zajímavý teda, ale u té jedničky se nepamatuju nic takovýhleho.
You know, online, what people are thinking about it, and I forget which magazine who said usually we don't review, you know, beta software, but they reviewed it and said this is awesome, and that gave us a tremendous amount of confidence. You know, it was an outside validation of what we were trying to do. You know, that it was the right thing.
I think just with first-person shooters already, they were kind of like the vowels of weapons you put into first-person. You got to have a shotgun, and there's obviously a pistol. You know, you need your weapon that's going to make you struggle and you drive you to get another weapon.
That was a lesson in how to make all.
A když se na to teď koukám, tak tohle ty starý pěcky mi zadechaly vzpomínek, že už to z dnešních her vůbec nemám. Většinou jsou hry na jedno použití a nevrátím se k nim. Je to tím, že jsem starý, nebo ty hry jsou větší a větší sračky? No ano, taky kámo, je to kvůli tomu, že vychází strašně moc her, které jsou docela jakoby jednoduše hratelný, no, ale jako já tě třeba řeknu za mě, že teda já mám nejlepší vzpomínky na třeba klidně hry, co jsem hrál 2 roky nazpátek. Jo, že jakoby prostě hry jsou špatný, jo, jako já neříkám, že všechny, ale spousta těch her prostě jakoby fakt je špatných, co vychází a je to prostě primárně kvůli tomu, že jak ty tíhneš ke hrám, které jsou z AAA scény, tak ta AAA scéna prostě už neumí dělat zábavní tituly. Oni dělají akorát produkty. No, takže kámo, ty tu máš takových prostě titulů, které jsou neuvěřitelné, jako jsem tady říkal, ale prostě hol vychází spoustu píčoven, no. Co si myslíš o GTA 6? Já si myslím, že GTA 6 bude skvělý titul. A to je celý. Jo, jako prostě nemyslím si, jakoby, že by to byla nějaká revoluce v gamingu, jak z toho lidi dělají. Takhle bych to řekl asi. No. Jako, já samozřejmě chápu, že to je extrémně očekávání a tak dále, ale fakt si nemyslím, že by to měla být nějaká revoluce v gamingu. Jako, kdybych teďko porovnával, nevěřím tomu, že bude GTA 6 lepší než RDR 2 v rámci kritického hodnocení. Si osobně myslím. RDR 2 měla třeba docela hodně průměrný kombat, ale měla úplně fenomenální vyprávění a svět. Jo, takže v tomhle tom prostě myslím, že třeba GTAčko bude mít jakoby lepší kombat a asi ty vole hezčí prostředí, protože ta hra bude nová, ale nevěřím tomu, že by konkurovala jako v rámci designu třeba RDR 2. Tak, sorry, jdeme dál.
All of your weapons as orthogonal as possible, so each one did something completely different. All of the crazy weapons, those are my fault. So I did like the rocket launcher and the Gauss gun and the snarks.
Oh, I like snarks. Snarks always made me laugh. It was just always funny to watch people run away from the snarks.
The squeak grenade. It's called the snark, but I wanted a little creature that you could bring up and hold, and you could throw it out, and it would just start running. Because people were camping, and everybody hated camping. So you wanted the anti-camp weapon. But it was kind of, you could literally find a little hidey hole and just sit out there and just throw out 30 of them. And they're all over the map. I had a cat. And you'd sit there and you'd do your finger blue. Yeah, you'd do your finger towards him, and he'd get mad at you and he'd swat. So that was the inspiration for that particular animation. And then the other, that big alien creature with the, we needed some kind of alien weapon. Drew that one, built that one, animated that one, but that was also another one that whenever you could get in a corner and just shoot them in the air because the hornets would track. I think that was the biggest thrill, is brainstorming these with your crew, making them, building them, putting them in the game, and then playing with them, and then they're fun.
So there's sort of a trope of having a melee weapon. I think it was Steve Bond and Ken Birdwell and I were saying we wanted a device where the world was reacting to you. It really goes back to that theory of fun. But we were just running around like idiots, smacking the wall. It's an odd thing to know in retrospect, but at the time it felt profoundly satisfying to be able to smack walls.
No,
and that was just an example of how that fairly abstract notion of what fun was.
Jako ať si kámo říká, kdo chce, co chce, to páčidlo, tak bylo úplně geniální prostě. Jakože oni to pak zkoušela spousta her tohleto mít, že jo, ale prostě páčidlo je prostě fucking páčidlo, ty vole.
Into a set of decisions that were really
tak to člověče možná porovnal, pamatujete si, jak v Doomovi byla ta pěst, on tam byl, to nebyl boxer, že jo, ale byla tam taková ta ostnatá prostě sračka, tak je to podobný, že jo. Akorát, že v Doomovi tak nebylo co rozbíjet, tam byly akorát barely.
When you're going around whacking a wall, a crowbar is an obvious thing to whack the wall with.
To byli Kingpin a ten by šel o hodně pozic. Všechny zvuky ve hře dělal jeden člověk? Ty krámo, to je šílenství normálně. Tak, ale teda zase bych to vzal, tak on jako všechny zvuky a hudbu v Hollow Knightovi, tak dělal Ari, že jo? Takže to je docela možná pochopitelný, no. Ty vole. To je děsivý.
If the sound could let you know what's going to happen, that's really makes it powerful. So we're always on the lookout for that in level design, in monster design, communicating, because the AI is often hidden from the player. So we use the sound to broadcast the internal state of the AI. You know, soldiers, they tell you, I'm injured, I'm going to throw a grenade, I'm taking cover. You know, they are broadcasting.
Ježiš, to je tahle ta mise, kámo. Tohle jsem dělal asi 2 hodiny v té Black Mesa, ty vole.
As constantly as they can, what's about to happen. So it was really important to try to keep those states distinct so that as you play the game, you're actually, whether you're aware of it or not, you're starting to be able to tell what's about to happen.
We knew he was a musician too, so he could do sounds, but you know, he also decided he was going to write the sound engine. And then he wrote the soundtrack. And he'd never written a soundtrack before, and he wrote the whole, you know, soundtrack for the game, and it won an award, and it was crazy.
Kámo, to byla jeho prvotina. On sám udělal soundtrack pro Half-Life. A byla to jeho první práce, jo.
There just weren't that many of us. You know, I had a little bit of a background playing music. I understood the sound engine really well, so it was really easy for me to just hook sounds in, and I understood enough about the level design side that I could kind of connect those things a little bit. The sounds could come from anywhere, and then I just heavily modified them. Usually those are animal sounds, reversing, changing the pitch, chopping them up and rearranging them. Head crabs were rats. The little squeaky, yeah, that's a rat slowed way, way down and then reversed.
To jsou krysy.
Yeah, the DSP stuff was another cool thing that Kelly built. When you got an event, it sounded like you were an event, and that wasn't really happening, I guess, at least in Quake and other games I was playing back then.
You know, we had these huge silos, these cavernous spaces. The day they had their own echoey DSP, it made an enormous difference, right? You believed the space.
Nebylo tam ticho, to je pravda. To je pravda, no.
Kelly tells me, oh God, Chuck.
V té době bylo AIX něco jako vrchol audia. Já se totiž nejsem jistý, ale pokud vím, tak v této době se ještě normálně kupovaly zvukovky a kupovaly se soundblastery. Na tohleto. Že velice matně si vybavuju to, že byl jakoby fakt brutální rozdíl jakoby mezi tím hrát tyhle ty hry bez zvukovky a s ní. Jakože fakt jakoby štílený, protože ty jsi měl nějaký, jak to kámo tenkrát fungovalo, ty jsi měl nějaký integrovaný zvuk, který bejval na desce, že jo? Který se vytahoval jakoby z toho kompu zpátky, anebo si měl prostě soundblaster koupený, že jo? který si potom napojoval do nějakých genius práků třeba, že jo, který jsme měl na stole, no, ty vole, to bylo šílený.
Jones asked him if the characters could speak and have their mouths move. And Kelly said, you know, that's super easy. You know, I could just look at the audio and see if they're talking and do that. But like getting their mouth to move is stupid, he says to me. And I look, Chuck Jones told me the same thing. I told him making the mouths move was super trivially easy, but knowing when they're talking and knowing how to follow the envelope of the speech would be impossible. And Kelly and I just both looked at each other and like, oh. And so I went back to my office and he went back to his office. And I think within an hour, the characters were talking and their mouths were moving. And it was only because we sat there at lunch bitching about an animator who was 100% right.
Why are you leaving me here?
Scientist conversations, Kelly and I made that. When they're next to each other, one scientist will occasionally play a question and the other one will give him an answer.
Yes.
And it's not a script, you know, it might not always make sense.
I am rather looking forward to this analysis, aren't you? I don't think so.
But it had a bunch of personality. It was really cool. And I worked on getting those guys to look at you and turn their heads.
When we first added the ability for scientists to respond to the player and other things in the environment, I would call them response rules. The first time that went in, they came flying down the elevator, and one of them looks at you and goes, "Oh, hello, Gordon." And then they explode into a pile of jibs at the bottom.
Hello, the automatic diagnostic and announcement system welcomes you to the Black Mesa.
Welcome to the Black Mesa.
Remember, have a secure
I hadn't really started working on the biggest part of the game, which I ended up shipping, which was surface tension. Prior to then, a lot of the work that I had done was the Alien Research Labs, which turned into...
Pojď prosím mě, toto je to relevantní. Ježíš, ty tady nabouráváš normálně ty vole reakci, vole. Je to relevantní, jo?
Put that down. It's a prototype. Whoa. Oh no! Ah! Oh dear! Ah! 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 Fascinating. Are you sure you checked the eigen attenuators? It's inconclusive. Do you know who ate all the donuts?
Co to je kámo za video, bože můj. Proč to má 2 pixely prostě třeba?
No! Hello? Oh. Oh my. Oh no. Excuse me, Gordon.
Ježíš, kámo, ty vole. Jako to video asi prostě tě vyhrabal někde z análu internetu, ne? Tohle jako neuvěřitelný.
Questionable ethics, and all of that was ditched. There were some concepts made it through. Everything was rebuilt from zero. But you know what did make it through was power up. Yeah, basically that geometry survived completely intact. It was so closely designed for that creature that because the creature survived, the levels survived along with it. Yeah, there's this sort of central circular thing where you have to rotate the train and you have to kill the Gargantua first because he was always defending the way out.
Počkat, tato mapka tam vážně byla? Já si vůbec nemůžu vybavit to, že by tam byla, ty vole. Zajímavý.
I mean, you have to go to like another area which looks very much like it was designed for Quake because pretty much it was. There was a flooded pump room and you have to drain the generator and then you can switch the power on and then you can take the train out. Yeah, I remember him being totally central to this whole thing. And then, well, how do we block the player? Which is, I mean, that's pretty much like design point number 1 for all level design. Okay, well, how do we prevent the player from just walking straight out through the exit? And you design backwards from there.
In the first year, we built a lot of world space, a lot of track, as we call it. And the programmers would try to fit the AI into the existing maps. What we did the second year was we built the AI in very constrained environments that showcase the AI. Let's make the ideal space for the AI and then give that to the level designers to incorporate those elements into their map so that it worked better and was more interesting. And that Gargantua was an example of that. And the grunts especially.
Yeah, we had the AI that Steve had been working on, and he had designed all these interesting encounters with them just in his test map, and so he had them up high and down low, and so basically we just sort of re-leveraged that and say, okay, let's start with the player comes in low, and there's a Marine on the same level, and then the next one they're up high, and then they come running down, because it was really neat to see them retreat. They'd try to run back up the stairs and try to flank you from another side.
Steve Bond, like I mentioned
earlier. To je taky strašně dobrý point, protože třeba Doom tak neměl elevaci, že jo? Tam byla esenciálně jakoby jedna vrstva, po který ty vole chodily mobky, a ty si akorát prostě občas mohli jít do patra, že jo? Ale jakoby reálně tam ta elevace jakoby nebyla. A já se jako nemůžu vybavit hru, která jako první měla elevaci. Jestli to byl Quake 2 nebo tohle, ty vole, to je fakt strašná otázka.
Earlier was this really young guy who had been making mods in Quake C. Really the designer for so much of the AI. I mean, all the stuff that's good about the soldiers, the grunts you fight in Half-Life.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a language we could sort of use to say, you know, this is a place they can climb. This is a place they can jump to. This is a good place to hide. These are good places to go in general, or interesting places. So, you know, the AI had a little bit of help.
Co třeba Unreal, člověče, možná, že Unreal měl ty vole první elevaci. Možná, že ono. Unreal 1. Zajímavý, teď se nejsem jistý.
We were trying to build something that utilized, you know, the train technology that Jay was working on. And we thought, well, let's give the player something that they can control, but in a limited way. We couldn't do vehicles like you see in Half-Life 2. So we did this, the most constrained vehicle we could think of, which was the train. Players didn't always bring the train with them. And so you had a bunch of these poor people walking down these tunnels.
Oh, is that why you electrified?
And the rails were, that was part of the feedback.
From that.
Part of the feedback was, well, you can just bypass all that, so we made the rails electric. It's like, well, maybe that'll teach them to bring the train with them. But the basic idea was, you know, let's explore that, and then also reveal some of the hidden deep parts of the base, you know, the abandoned areas where you might get a lot more of the Zen creatures. You know, we had designed some of the ones that didn't make it into the game to appear there, you know, bats that would dive bomb you and while you're on the train. Yeah, Stuka bats. And then we also tried hard to not make it feel like it was the super linear thing, so we tried to give little branches, and so there were some challenges there.
Well, there's a really good sketch that Kelly Bailey made, which basically charted surface tension, and it was pretty extensive. Like, it went through the cliffside, and it went through areas where tanks were, and like a lot of soldier holdouts. Yeah.
Jako teda nevím, jak tohle to bylo třeba těžký v originále, ale v té Black Mesa bylo tohleto těžký jako píče, kámo, normálně, ty vole, jo. Ano, Fialo, Quake 1 byla první true 3D hra, pokud to někoho zajímá, tak na bázi světla a 3D renderingu. Jinak ještě předtím na 64-bitových arkádách byly 3D enginy, ale nic jako Half-Life nebo Quake. Jo.
Through the desert with the cactuses and the helicopters, and then across a dam. It was pretty extensive. When I saw that sketch, I was so motivated to just start building all of that stuff.
So I ran ahead with a lot of level design and a lot of geometry, and it seems like a lot of it stuck in some way or another, which is really amazing. I did the dam, which was funny. I just did that in a day. Right. Like, it was like about 4 or 5 hours. I did a Hoover Dam thing because I like the Hoover Dam.
I saw a concept of the cliffside. I think Harry Teasley built that render of the skybox. Yes. And I just thought, holy crap, this is perfect for Vertigo. Like, whatever we do here, we have to play on Vertigo and like narrow little edges and, you know, places you would like to normally dodge a grenade that you can't.
Jinak třeba menší fun fact, německá verze Half-Lifeu měla kvůli cenzuře místo vojáků roboty a místo toho, aby ti umřeli, tak se vsadili na podlahu a řekli ti, nemůžu uvěřit, že jsi mě zabil. Tomu nevěřím. Zrovna německá verze, ty vole. Neuvěřitelný, kámo.
And that's the moment. That's really the big part of that level, is that reveal, and the play is kind of supports it afterward. Yeah. The helicopter comes in, you're fighting the helicopter, which is awesome.
Počkat, to mi to neříkejte, že to navádění raket fungovalo i v původním Half-Lifeu. To fungovalo originálně v roce 98, jo. Ty vole. Jak to udělali, kámo?
First of all, I had a bunch of textures, and then every time I made new ones, whoever was working on the new levels would be like, "Oh, fresh textures! I'm going to use those." Somebody making another level would start using them, and I was like, "No, this is chaos. We need to restrict this." So I started naming the texture sets by the level that they were made for. I was trying to.
Děláš, jak kdyby 98 byl pravěk, no ale on jako byl, vole. Jakože v rámci her, tak to skutečně byl. Takhle ne pravěk, je to něco jako třeba doba bronzová, že jo? Kdybychom to porovnávali, no.
For some sort of like visual cohesion, and so that really ended up working.
There was one level I did, it was the introduction of the sort of the bounce pads, the alien bounce pads in the real world.
Tohle to je z toho německého Half-Lifeu, jo? To mě zajímá. Show me. Ježiš, kámo, to je pain, ty vole. Ani krev tam nebyla, že jo? No.
Because, you know, story-wise, like, okay, you're getting closer to hitting the alien world, so I was, well, let's get a little bit of alien world infection into the real world. So I had done it just as a visual thing. John Guthrie made it 10 times better. And that's actually where he found the photo of my daughter, because I didn't put my daughter in Gordon's locker. I hid her in, like, this destroyed office someplace, you know, as a little Easter egg for myself. And John went in and put my daughter's photo in Gordon's locker, which I think was a good decision.
I still get questions about stuff that I spent 5 minutes on 25 years ago from people who've now thought about this for 25 years, and they're thinking that there's 25 years worth of development went into this. I'm like, on some level, when you start talking about lore, I'm like, well, there's Black Mesa. That was just a matter, we needed a name for something that was evocative.
In that entrance, when you get off the train and there's that lobby where there's a big map on it, and when we were making that map, that was fairly early on, I put a dot in New Mexico. And then that turned into, I think Mark saw that, he was like, oh, where is that? This is where we are. And then he named it Black Mesa.
That is a favorite thing of mine, actually. If you come up with a name for something, and it evokes something, then you don't have to write the whole story. It's because it's a conspiracy plot. Everybody knows more about it than you do, so you don't have to answer those questions. You just keep raising questions and make the mystery kind of thing.
Like dialogue came in later. Also a lot of
Jako to ten největší problém, který já s tímhletím mám, tak je to, že doteďka to lore není konzistentní. Protože ty tady prostě máš Portál 1, Portál 2, Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2, epizodu 1, epizodu 2, Alyx. A prostě není to jakoby pořád, není to pořád konzistentní, že jo. A přitom jako hlavně, ten příběh je úplně šílený. Jakože opravdu je strašně dobrý. A celý ten world building okolo toho je výborný, ale vlastně fakt by to chtělo to konečně už jako uzavřít někdy, no.
The scripted sequences came in later, and those helped to kind of sharpen the storytelling aspect of it, because, I mean, setting expectations to get up to the surface and then like, oh no, they're not here to help us.
The whole thing about diegetic writing, right? Like keeping the exposition in the game instead of outside the game. You know, I give a lot of credit to Mark.
After playtests, we'd realized that maybe you need more of a dialogue cue about something.
That's when we started to do like scientists who were literally pop up in a corner and go that way. There's a few of those that we stuck in right at the end when we'd like, well, we get one more session with Hal. He can say, go down here, you know, go around that corner.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong.
I knew Hal from San Francisco as an artist, cartoonist. He was also an animator and an actor in some science fiction movies. So when we got down to the wire, we did a bunch of voice casting and nothing was right. And I just kept thinking of Hal. And I finally just called him and said, Hal, I want you to at least talk to people here so they can hear your voice. And I got him on a speakerphone, and I had a bunch of people gathered in my office. And I'm like, okay, Hal, everybody's here. And he's like, well, what would you like me to say? And everybody was like, this is him. This is the guy.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Another interesting voice thing was the G-Man. So we liked Mike Shapiro's work. So we knew we wanted to use him, but we brought him in to do Bonnie and also the G-Man. So we did a take on all the G-Man lines with kind of a straight voice, and I was thinking that, okay, we have something safe, but we're not super excited about it, and give us something else. And he does this crazy lizard voice.
The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed.
And we took it back, and everybody just loved the crazy lizard voice, and so that's how it worked out.
Did you do the Nihilanth?
I did.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nihilanth. Just imagine his head floating in space as a baby.
Neuvěřitelný.
I went into Gabe's office and I demanded Gabe to either fire Ken.
Co tady bylo, kámo, zajímavý, na střílečku je to OK příběh, ale zase takový zázrak to není. Já jsem nemyslel, že ten příběh je zázračný, já jsem, že ten svět je zázračný, protože když do toho zapojíš Half-Life 2, tak to máš najednou kombajny a teďko G-Man a Vortignauti, který mají vlastní propojení vědomí, ty vole, že jo, a tak dále. Že celkově ten svět jakoby je velmi zajímavý, ale prostě pořád jakoby to není dokončení prostě. Ano, je to takový, jako že to někde začíná, ale pořád tam chybí extrémně hodně věcí, no.
Or I quit. And Gabe just laughed at me.
Correct response from Gabe.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Until Bill got there, I was the oldest guy there. It was hard because, you know, I had to go home in the evenings, whereas the young guys who just moved out from Florida or wherever, they did not have to go home in the evenings. I'd go home, see my kids when they were in bed. I would come back down the hill to Valve. Nobody else I worked with had to get up to get their kids off to school in the morning, but I did.
You're wired to just take full advantage of the situation. You put everything into it. So when we say we worked 18-hour days, that's no exaggeration.
Yeah.
Not at all. I can edit all day.
I
can design all day. I don't have to worry about anything. You know, two guys from Microsoft start a game studio with a bunch of incredibly capable, you know, with an incredible team. You're gonna push yourself harder than ever before.
I don't usually crunch real hard. I get it done in I come in, I work, I go home, and a lot of people were living really long hours. You know, the classic. Well, I'll come in at 1 and then goof around for a while and then work late into the morning, late at night. I was employee 17.
To de facto, kámo, ty vole, jak streamování, no. To je úplně stejný.
There was a woman that was the kind of the office manager, and eventually Mona Lisa Guthrie came in at the desk. I was the only woman on the team. That was not awesome.
I decided to become a baseball fan here after the birth of my first daughter. So she's the one in Gordon's locker, Isabel, but she's very special needs. She's 25 today. You know, cognitively, she's about 3 years old.
Wow.
So after her birth, in the middle of Half-Life production, it was really hard. It was really hard because we were getting about 2 hours of sleep at a stretch because she had to be fed through a tube in her stomach every 2 hours. I had just a difficult time relating to the world when she was a baby. I had a hard time just talking to people because I was just kind of tired and angry all the time. Yeah, my wife, she worked at Valve for a while. She did a bunch of textures for the game. Like I say, she did those soda machines. She did just a bunch of level textures. She textured.
Jako já přiznám se, že to je moc pěkný porovnání, protože spousta lidí tak prostě má náročnou práci nebo prostě něco okolo sebe a ona jakoby komunikace s lidmi je dost náročná. Jako mezi náma dost často mi přijde, že spousta lidí, kteří žijou akorát na internetu, tak vlastně jakoby nechápou, jak fungují lidi v reálném životě. A ten střed s realitou bude jednou jako dost drsnej v tomhle.
Big Mama, the sort of boss creature, she textured him. But when Isabel arrived, she obviously had a lot of issues. So Yachts had to stop working and stay with her at home. And it was the last year of Half-Life, and we pretty much crunched that whole year. So I was at work a lot. It was hard. It was definitely a hard year.
No, zvládli to, kámo. Kámo, ten původní Xen byl prý úplně hrozný.
Games have often had this thing where they're just a little too attached to Star Wars, Blade Runner, Aliens. So it wasn't that hard to try to get people to go, let's think of something really alien. Like what Zen was initially was you're going to go inside a huge alien organism and kill it or figure out how to turn it on or off or something like that. I didn't know we couldn't actually do that or what was involved.
Yep.
What does it mean to have alien architecture or a planet that's biologically defining the structures in it, as opposed to what the tools were good at, which is making rectangles?
And then slowly it scaled back till it was more and more corridors, and that everybody was really good at.
People were finishing up stuff and I was still working on Zen because it was like it went through a lot of iteration, or at least we're trying to figure out what it was. Different people were taking swings at it, either in static concepts.
Weren't you under a bit of a timeline crunch for it as well?
Yeah, it was the end of the game.
Yeah.
I wanted to cut stuff out, and they're like, no, leave it in. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have any support for this.
Right.
And then after a lot of it was built, is like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the gravity and give you a jump pack. That came later. And I was like, ah.
There's a lot of stuff, especially in Zen, where you're getting close to a first draft of some things, right? Because we just didn't have time, and we got to the end of the game, and so we considered not going to Zen, but
Já mám třeba pocit, že ten Xen tak dopadl podobně jako Lost Isles v Dark Souls, že prostě oni už neměli čas to dokončit, tak prostě tam přišel nějaký Japonec a řekl, vemte ty vole vemte T-Rexe a naházejte ho do lávy a uřízněte mu hlavu, jo. A teďko takhle nějak dopadlo jako Lost Isles, jo. A tohle to vypadá, že je hodně
the art concepts people did were so cool.
For the Zen textures, I was deeply inspired by electron microscope imagery, and we had so much of that regular structural texture material that I wanted to do something more organic. Insects as well. I think there's a lot of textures that were based on beetles. That was really fun. And incredibly challenging levels to make because that editor was not friendly for organic shapes.
I built the little behaviors for the tree that hits you if you get too close, and the light stalk that kind of hides. But Ken did a bunch of AIs there, the floating controller guys.
And the flying guys were great, but you had to set up air nodes for them to travel properly. I prototyped a lot, and some of those prototypes were used in the final battle, I believe, and also for the Gonard, which I think Randy did.
We, at some point, have to stop polishing. At some point, we have to, like, it is what it is. And if the player hasn't had fun up until that point, well, then we failed. They're not going to get to that point, so who cares? It just has to finish, and it did.
Yes,
yeah. And there's always Half-Life 2 to win them back. I love that sensation of being alone in an alien dimension. But the experience that people really liked in the game was scientists pop up and Barney pops up and you have companions and you have this feeling of companionship around you with all the other stuff that's going on. So a lot of people miss that, which I understood, and I think if we'd had thought about the ending from the beginning, we would have figured out some ways to do that a little more.
Takže zítra to bylo. Zítra to je 25 let. Ty vole. Neuvěřitelný.
I remember coming back from downtown Cabo very drunk and then running to the beach, but didn't know there was like a 6-foot retaining wall there, so I just went right over.
Zítra finále Borlci, jo, taky jsem budu nakoukat.
I was hurting so much I slept the night where I fell. Yeah, I woke up the next morning.
I had never heard that
really
story.
Stiff neck.
Oh my God. It's a good thing you were pretty young.
I remember after we'd gone final on the...
Jako hele, teďko taková, jako by lehká nostalgie, jo. Pamatujete si, jak jste procházeli takovýhle klasický papírový fotky po každé akci? Já jsem si teďko na to bezky normálně vzpomněl a ty krávo, to je prostě 15 let nazpátek se třeba to dělalo, že? To už taky prostě je jedna věc, která se dneska jako nedělá, jo. Já prostě nemám, já nemám doslova doma fyzicky jedinou fotku. Třeba. Dneska máš Instagram, přesně tak, no. Dneska máš všechno v telefonu, ty vole. Je to mega zajímavý, no. My máme normálně alba, no já třeba právě ne, protože jak se rozváděli moje rodiče, tak všechny moje fotky jsou prostě pryč. To je něco, o čem tady nechci mluvit, ale jakoby nějakým způsobem si to pamatuju. Velmi jakoby dobře, no. Že byly ze všeho kámo fotky. Je to hustý, no. Je to strašně zajímavý.
You were pretty young. I remember after we'd gone final on the game, I was home one morning, you know, taking a shower, and my wife asked me, you know, like, it's done. Is it any good? Is the game any fun? I don't know. Like, I hope so.
I don't think it's exaggerating by saying if any one of the crew had disappeared for a month, we wouldn't have shipped. You know, it didn't matter who they were. You know, everybody was mission critical.
My inspiration from Valve, what I really took away with me was that the thing that is most important to me is what are we making? Coming in as a texture artist, you don't have a lot of expectation that you're going to get to influence that. And I was able to have quite a bit of influence on the what.
It was so fun to work with the people who were making Half-Life. The collection of people were diverse, at least like in their professional backgrounds, was kind of all over the place. And so figuring out how to work with all those people, but also just the fact that we had hired really stellar people who were good at collaborating, like they're conscientious people, deeply passionate about what they wanted to create. That just was a recipe for a professionally, like, really good time.
It seems to me that one of the things that good games do is make 2 games worth of stuff and then throw away the bad game. And fortunately, like, Valve was able to do that. A lot of companies couldn't do that, but backstopped by Gabe and Mike, you know, Valve could afford to do that.
I always have absolutely nothing interesting to say when people say, would you reflect on your legacy? Like, I really don't look back a whole lot. I'm always excited by the future, right? So to me, it's like I can look back at the things we did, but to me, they're just sort of like the stepping stones to what we're going to be able to do in the future. That's just how I'm wired, right?
Kámo. To byla taková strašná halus, to normálně. Ježíš, ten první, tohle je první dust, je to možný? 1-0 dust, že jo? Ještě. Ne 1-6, 1-0. No, ty vole. Ježiš, kámo, to byl tak výborný dokument, tohleto normálně, do prdele, tyjo. Jako teda 10 z 10, jakoby nepřeháním. Now available in Half-Life Deathmatch. Ježiš, kámo, prostě oni normálně... Prostě fakt jenom Half-Life je schopný po 25 letech udělat update na hru. Jo, to je neuvěřitelné normálně, je to jako by nostalgie, ale jenom to něco ukazuje, no. Jako, jak to říct, jako čete slušky, no, já si prostě myslím, že ono skutečně se něco stalo a je to zajímavý vidět, jak opravdu tato hra ovlivnila kompletně celý gaming. A pořád vlastně ovlivňuje, že jo. Jako vemte si, že ty vole nejhranější kompetitivní střílečka, tak je mod na Half-Life, ty vole. Jo, třeba. kdybychom teďko začali, že jo. Nebo třeba Overwatch, tak vychází z Team Fortressu, což byl taky ty vole mod na Half-Life prostě, jo. Je to šílený, jo. Je to úplně šílený, fakt. Bylo to vidět. A našli bychom toho spoustu, no. A jsem teda člověče nadšený, no. Jako jestli skutečně Gaben, jakoby to, co říká, a to, co říká a myslí vážně, že se koukají do budoucnosti, tak já opravdu doufám, že někdy jednoho dne napadne udělat nějaký závěrečný díl Half-Lifeu, kde prostě uzavřu ten příběh konečně. Protože tam už teď už to není jakoby jenom o Gordonovi, ale to je Alex, to je její otec, že jo? A prostě všechno okolo a teďko teda jak to skončí, kámo. Jak to skončí. Nebo třeba Čel, že jo? Jestli se někdo ještě tady pamatuje Čel. Ježiš, to bylo výborný. Napsal bych nějaký chytrý komentář, akorát přemýšlím, jaký ty vole. Zkusím to, jo. Takhle bych to asi kámo napsal, ty vole. To by asi šlo.